Our theme for this season is how the valley spirit never dies. We will introduce Chapter 6 of Laozi. We have mentioned that Laozi's book has more than a dozen chapters specifically discussing the concept of the Tao. Since we are studying Laozi's Taoism, it is impossible to bypass the concept of the Tao. However, this concept is really not easy to clarify. We often remember the opening words of Laozi's first chapter: the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So every time we encounter such chapters, we must be particularly attentive and try our best to clarify them. Let's read the original text of Chapter 6 first. The text says, "The valley spirit never dies. It is called the mysterious female. The gate of the mysterious female is the root of heaven and earth. It is used with seeming inexhaustibility." Only 3 simple lines. How to understand them? Let me first say it in vernacular English: the spirit of the valley does not perish and can be called the divine fertility. The divine fertility has an outlet, which can be called the root of heaven and earth. It seems to exist faintly, yet its use is inexhaustible. We have experienced this last sentence: it seems to exist faintly, yet its use is inexhaustible. This is Laozi's method of apophatic theology, a technique he often employs. First, what does the valley spirit mean? When we read a book, the most challenging concept is the one that appears only once, making it difficult to compare and understand. What is the valley spirit? Valley refers to a valley. Laozi has clearly observed the character of a valley. When he describes the cultivation of a sage, he says that his mind is as open as a river valley between 2 mountains that allows a river to flow through. This valley has 2 characteristics: first, it is empty, and second, it is low-lying. Speaking of emptiness, if it were filled or substantial, you would see the river but not the valley. So it must be empty to allow the river to pass, and in essence, the valley is empty in contrast to the mountain. The second characteristic is that it is low-lying. Its position is low. Of course, there are lower ones such as the rivers and seas, and we will see related comparisons in the future regarding the relationship between valleys and rivers and seas. So what is the valley spirit? The word spirit is often used by the ancients, and it generally has 2 considerations. On one hand, the spirit is the spirit of ghosts and deities, a real power that can bless or curse people. So when the ancients talk about ghosts and deities, they would say, be careful, ghosts and deities reward the good and punish the evil. Another usage is that the spirit represents the function of a temple. Now, how to explain the valley spirit? It can be understood as the force that makes the valley a valley, which is the function of the temple. This valley allows the river to flow through and be filled with water. Usually, as a valley, it maintains an empty state, and the empty state has infinite possibilities. So later, it speaks of immortality, which is a standard negative form of syntax, saying that the valley spirit will never die or disappear because the force that makes the valley a valley always exists. Therefore, it can be called divine fertility. What does this mean? It is to describe divine fertility. The word mysterious represents the mysterious fertility. Mysterious represents the profound secrets of the universe that people find hard to understand, so they regard it as mysterious. This also indirectly acknowledges the limitations of our reason. Then, the gate of the mysterious female is the portal through which this divine fertility continuously manifests. This gate is called the root of heaven and earth. Laozi often uses the word root, and he believes that all things in the universe return to their roots, representing his emphasis on the origin. Since you say it is the root of heaven and earth, it represents that the Tao is the root of heaven and earth. Besides the Tao, what else could there be? How to understand the Tao? Use the valley spirit as a metaphor. The Tao is the force that makes the valley a valley. In fact, all things come from the Tao, represented by the valley, which allows the river to fill and flow through, maintaining an empty state and being in a low place, capable of containing and bearing all things. So what is said here is the special function of the Tao. Wang Bai's commentary is very clear. He believes that there is nothing in the center of the valley, no shape or shadow, no obstruction or conflict. It is in a low place, but it does not change, it is in a quiet place, but it does not recede, all things are formed by it, but you cannot see its form, so the valley spirit is used as a metaphor for the function of the Tao. Heaven and earth are the places where all things exist, the largest domain, which can represent the entire natural world. The origin of heaven and earth is of course the Tao, so Laozi uses the valley spirit to replace the Tao, saying that it always exists, which is a very reasonable idea. Then the following two sentences say that it is seemingly existent, used without exhaustion. Pay attention to the word seemingly. Seemingly means as if, which is also the method of apophatic theology used by Laozi. That is, I cannot directly describe what the Tao is, but I am not willing to just say what it is not, so I say it seems to be something. Saying it seems to be something does not affirm, and I say it in a questioning tone, but saying it seems to be something obviously says some words that allow us to use it so-called as if to imagine along this line of thought. So here it says it seems to exist fatally, which means it seems to exist because you cannot directly say that it exists. If you say the Tao exists, I'm sorry, do all things exist? These two existences are completely different. The existence of all things is short-lived and full of changes, while the Tao is the existence itself, eternal and unchanging. So at the beginning, he will say that the valley spirit does not die, and the word does not die represents that it will always exist, and its existence is not only not on an equal footing with the existence of all things, but even vastly different. The Tao is the source and destination of all existence, and its function is inexhaustible. Here we all know the way of thinking with essence and function. When you do not know what the essence of something is, look at its function, and judge what its essence should be from its function. The two words essence and function have often appeared in modern times. For example, we have heard of Chinese learning for essence, Western learning for function, which means that we Chinese have our own knowledge as the essence, and when it is used, Western academia is more advanced, and the improvement of social life is clearer, so we have to use the Western learning. But the issue of combining Chinese and Western essence and function is very complicated and not easy to clarify. We just explained that the word essence and function can be established. So many scholars in later generations will mention that if you want to know something, you cannot understand what it is, and can only look at its function. When talking about function, others will know, oh, what kind of thing you are talking about. So here, what is affirmed is the inexhaustible function of the Tao. Let's summarize what was said before. Heaven and earth are finite, but the Tao is infinite, so we can be sure that the Tao is immortal. The valley is empty in the middle. Why is it called divine? You cannot predict that sometimes the water is full, and sometimes it is empty. So the force that makes the valley a valley is the Tao. So using the valley to symbolize the Tao has its rationality. Mr. Yan Fu, who translated Evolution and Ethics, has studied Laozi quite a bit. How does he explain the phrase the valley spirit never dies? He says that the Tao is empty, so it is called a valley, but the Tao is infinitely responsive, so it is called divine. The Tao, as mentioned in chapter 10, though used, is not exhausted, just like a bellows, which is talking about the space between heaven and earth. So heaven and earth also come from the Tao. The space between heaven and earth continuously produces all things and will never be exhausted. It can be said to be immortal. At the same time, these 3 points together can be said that the valley spirit is nothingness, can be infinitely applied, it always exists, and can create all things. These 3 points are the specific manifestations of the Tao. In other words, we cannot directly grasp what the Tao is, we can only describe it from its function. So in this episode, what have we learned? We see that the content of Laozi's chapter 6 is very short, but the meaning is profound because it talks about the core concept of Taoism. The word certainly, here is the continuation of the translation. Tao represents the source and destination of all things. The valley spirit is used as a metaphor for the Tao. The valley is empty, and the Tao's emptiness signifies the ability to contain all things, allowing all things to flow through it like a river through a valley. When the weather changes and there is no rain for a while, the valley returns to its empty state. At the same time, it is also the lowest point, so the river returns and resides within the valley. Being both empty and humble, it can contain all existence, and thus can be regarded as the root of heaven and earth. Essentially, heaven and earth emerge from this place, which is what Laozi points out in this chapter with just a few short sentences. Despite its brevity, it still highlights the characteristics of the Tao, seemingly intangible, yet its function is inexhaustible. Laozi places special emphasis on the concept of valley or gu in Chinese. For instance, in chapter 39, we will see that Laozi discusses 6 realms all related to the Tao: heaven, earth, the divine, the valley, all things, and the king. Honestly, apart from the valley, the others are easier to grasp as they have specific conditions that directly relate to the Tao. Like heaven and earth, all things, and the king, there's no issue with them being associated with the Tao. But what about the valley? Therefore, Laozi particularly highlights the valley, indicating his special observation of it. Because at certain times, the valley can be filled with water, and at other times, the water flows away, leaving the valley hollow and empty, which is why it is called a valley. These insights were inspired by Laozi, and we still use an idiom to this day, with a humility like that of a valley, which also comes from a similar context. Students, you can ponder on this. It's not easy for us to observe the various changes in the valley's state, but the term with a humility like that of a valley is still worth our attention. If you want to maintain a humble state of mind, like a valley, on one hand, it is empty and can accommodate the ideas of others, and on the other hand, it is humble and does not compete with others. In this way, won't we feel that our lives return to a more simple and natural state? I'd like to hear your thoughts.